First of all, Stuart, as a dairy farmer, could I just ask you how COVID-19 has particularly affected the dairy industry?
Of all the sectors, arguably the dairy sector has been the most affected. I think the two that you'd really highlight, one is the dairy sector and one is the ornamental sector with the closure of garden centres. The big issue with dairy has been historically, if you take how we all consume food, about 50% is consumed out of home, 50% at retail. With the closure of coffee shops, restaurants, cafes, etc., we've seen that switch to 100% of retail. So those supply chains, those processors that were predominantly supplying into the food service sector have basically seen the decimation of their customer base. And for a number of farmers, this has led to not even having their milk collected on some days, milk being thrown down the drain, prices being cut very significantly. And you know, somewhere over 2,000 farmers have been in that very, very desperate state. And I think it's also the waste issue. You look at throwing a highly nutritious, well, we'll come on to the subject of the nutritious qualities of milk, but throwing away a valuable foodstuff because your customer doesn't want to take it has put farmers in a very, very desperate state.
Yeah, absolutely. Alexia, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, when we heard this was happening, I mean, I was brought up in Dorset, in an area between Sherburn and Wincanton, which is, I mean, it's just thick with dairy. It's fantastic, and thankfully, everyone who was farming when I was a child is still farming now. So it's a sector that I care about passionately because many of my friends are dairy farmers, and as many people know, Love British Food has been leading the way, representing farming in the food service sector for many years now. And over that time, we've built up a really strong relationship with the NHS, interestingly, with the Hospital Caterers Association, working directly with hospital trusts. On Friday, I had a long conversation with the new director of NHS Supply Food. And so when the dairy crisis happened, I, wearing our sort of food service hat, I thought, what can we do in this, to help? And the hospital sector is a very interesting one. And the NHS is one of British farming's biggest customers. And hospitals are huge consumers of milk. Each hospital will order, on average, 1 pint of milk per patient per day. Now, obviously, at the moment, situations in hospitals are different. Normal operations aren't taking place and things. But in a normal course, the NHS is consuming a lot of milk. And we just had this idea, very simply, to set up a matchmaking service to match local dairies with their local hospital. And it was very much inspired by work we did back in 2016 with a hospital up in Nottingham that now sources all its milk from a local dairy. And actually they source all their meat from the East Midlands, and they've, I mean, just on a different sector, they've been completely responsible for keeping a certain pig farmer up there farming, and he was going to give up before he got the contract with that particular hospital. So we knew it was possible. We knew there is a huge appetite in the NHS. They've been tasked with sourcing 20% of their food supplies from small, medium enterprises. So there's a ready, open audience to team local dairies with their local hospital.
Fantastic. And do you know so far with the dairy industry then how if they're sort of meeting that potential target?
Well, we're sowing seeds. I mean, we're now working with a number of farmers in Kent, Devon, and in York, and it's early days. But what's interesting with this is there is a real short-term possibility, actually, that you could pull off a new contract with a hospital, because some hospitals are in contracts that they can literally just change straight away. Others are in longer-term contracts, and by establishing the relationship between that dairy and the local hospital, well, you could be looking at something that, in the medium to longer term. But I think in the world where we're living in now, and and everything that we've been talking about so far with dairy, if a hospital is a robust customer longer term, then I think the relationships between dairy farmers and the NHS is a supply chain we should all be focusing on.
Yeah.
Can I just build on that point? Because I think it's something that's come out of the COVID-19 crisis. I think actually people are looking at what are our supply chains. And I think coming out of this, our relationship with food, our relationship with provenance, the integrity of food, I think these things are going to come under even more spotlight. And I think examples like Alexia's just flagged up there, I hope we will see more and more of as both consumers and suppliers start to learn more about each other and look to work much closer together. I think it'll be a positive aspect to come out of something that's been a pretty negative situation.
I completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually picking up on that point, Ollie, I think you had some questions that Stuart might be interested to answer when we think about particularly food provenance when it comes to dairy. I know, having worked as a vet myself on dairy farms, my experience was always one of excellent welfare, but perhaps Stuart might like to talk a little bit more about that. And I know you had some specific questions, Ollie.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Stuart.
Hi.
Thanks, Lucy. I mean, I love dairy. I'm not because I'm half French, but I'm half French. So I kind of grow up on a very heavy butter milk diet. And so I'm a fan, my friend. However, I'm also a huge fan of animals and care about animal welfare. And on the other side of the fence, you hear the counter argument against the dairy industry. And it's just good to hear your point of view as a dairy farmer. One of the things that gets repeated is that it is cruel to cows. The actual production of milk is cruel to cows because you are taking away the calves at an unnaturally young age to stimulate extra production of milk from the cow. And you can often visibly see through the physicality of the cow, through the noises it's making, that it's distressed. What is your experience as a farmer with many years' experience?
So the first thing to say is I have never experienced that. I go back to something Lucy said. Every single farmer I know takes the welfare of their animals extremely seriously. There's lots of things that people are doing. So one of the issues that quite often gets raised is male dairy calves. This is an issue that gets raised often, and what happens to those animals. And actually what we're seeing is more and more use of sex semen, so that actually we're seeing more female animals come through for more replacements. But I have never met a farmer who doesn't take the welfare of their calves and their cows extremely seriously. And I think it's one of the things, we're at the end of a week this week where we saw the agriculture bill in the middle of last week through Parliament, which actually we look to use that to protect the standards we've got. Our animal welfare standards in this country are amongst the highest in the world. And therefore it is vital going forward we continue to do that, because there will be production systems around the world that don't take those issues as seriously as we do as a British farmer, and arguably as a British consumer. It's what I expect. So I do not see that experience on the ground, and what I do see is farmers working 365 days a year looking after those animals and treating them with the very highest respect.
And mainly to you, Lucy, but as well to anyone on the panel. I mean, competition is rife in the food market, and now the dairy industry, on top of everything else they have to contend with, they have a lot of competition emerging in terms of substitute milk drinks, rice milk, oat milk, etc., etc. What would you say as a nutritionist are the benefits of milk that you cannot find in the substitute milk drinks, or are there any? Because obviously some of the substitute milk drinks will then add maybe a bit of iodine, or they'll boost the calcium content to mimic natural contents of milk. So what's your opinion on that as a nutritionist? Is it the same to add extra bits to your milk? Is that oat milk as healthy as a dairy milk, for example, with calcium content?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and definitely picking up on the calcium content. The really key thing to note here is that we only ever actually are able to absorb about a third of the calcium that's in food anyway. And the wonderful thing about dairy is that it is the calcium that's in dairy is the most absorbable source of calcium. Dairy provides us with a very readily absorbable calcium, and the reason for that is that the lactose, the natural sugar in milk, and also one of the proteins, the casein, actually enhance our ability to absorb the calcium. So even though calcium is added to plant milks and cereals and lots of other foods, we are much more able to absorb it from dairy. It's a sort of classic example of having the nutrient in its natural food form. And interestingly, I think a key area with this is particularly within the age group of sort of 14 to 18-year-old girls in particular. We have a survey, a food intake survey that's done every year in the UK, and constantly it shows calcium intake within that age group to be quite low. And when you consider that we all reach our maximum bone density by the time we're 18, which is much younger than a lot of people realise, those years are crucial for making sure we have a good calcium intake. And of course, they also tend to be the years when these wonderfully savvy teens are, they're easily influenced by a lot going on social media. So it's just really important to be aware that there are many good reasons for following a diet which is plant-based, but it's just very important to understand the difference in the amount of calcium that we can get from dairy compared to other foods.
Which is why I guess they used to make policy where they would give children milk at a primary or nursery age.
Yeah.
Years growing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we haven't got time today. I could go on about it for ages, but there's fabulous research to show that children who do drink whole milk, for example, are much less prone to becoming overweight later in life. And there's so many good reasons why we really need to be promoting dairy as much as we can.
And Lucy, if I can just step in, I mean, bringing that back to the conversations I have with NHS trusts and NHS supply food, is the nutritionists in hospitals really value dairy. I mean,
Excellent.
When you're lying in hospital, you are not off. Someone doesn't come around and say, "Now, would you like almond milk, oat milk, or dairy?" They don't ask you that question. It's just milk.
Yeah.
And the nutritionists, they value it. They understand it.
Yeah.
A lot of people in hospital, particularly the frail and the elderly, they are, one of the key things hospitals are trying to do is keep weight, keep valuable nutrition, and the milk is a core part of that. Equally interestingly, I mean, it's such another topical sector, but to mention is the care home sector. Again, in care homes, they really value the nutrition of dairy milk. That is the milk they want to be giving to their elderly residents. And it's, I mean, a very well-known dairy family down in the southwest who's produces a yogurt brand that I'm sure many of us have in our fridges. I mean, they've gone to great lengths recently to actually develop a version of their yogurt that is higher in fat, specifically for the care home market. So there are sectors of society. I mean, you highlighted the teenage thing, but there are sectors of society that really do value the nutritional qualities.
Absolutely, and it's a great point, Alexia, that's just one age group that I highlighted. But of course, in milk, you've got this fantastic food that is jam-packed with all sorts of other nutrients. And for the elderly who are needing a food source which is really concentrated energy, And there's also things, I mean, there are nutrients in milk that people don't know about. So like vitamin B2 is really high in milk and actually helps our absorption of iron. So again, as you were mentioning, in care homes and in hospitals where perhaps patients, their iron are often dropping low, certainly in more senior years, milk really helps to absorb iron. So, that there are many, many reasons, and obviously it's a fabulous source of really good quality protein. It contains, so when we talk about good quality protein, we mean food that has all the different building blocks of protein that we require ourselves. Plant sources, again, don't tend to have every single amino acid in their protein, whereas protein from animal sources do. That there are a few plants that do, but again, dairy, a very high quality source of protein as well. So many great reasons to encourage it, certainly as a very good quality food.
So I think if I can just add to that, I mean, I think my message would be to any dairy farmers tuning into this is, I have friends with dairy farmers who worry very much whether they really are going to have a business to hand over to their sons and daughters, and indeed to their grandchildren. They're looking to the future and they are questioning it, and they're questioning it because they're coming back from the supermarkets and they're seeing the dairy proportion of the aisle shrinking, and they're seeing that oat milk, almond milk, soy milk, whatever, increasing. And my message, I think, from the conversation we've been having, where you have so articulately explained the nutritional qualities, is that there is a market for dairy, and there always will be. And dairy farmers, you stand proud of your product, because just look, when we've just been talking about two sectors, the NHS and the care sector, there is a market for your product, and it is not going to go away. So stand proud, be confident in the future, and no more talk of giving up.
Look, absolutely, Alexia. And I think it's not even about keeping the market we've got. I see huge potential to expand that market. The basis of a healthcare system is nutrition. That has got to be the starting point for some of this. And also, if you widen that out, one of the other big criticisms, and you'll know as well as anyone, is not just the nutritional qualities, it's actually the environmental impact of these products. We have some of the most sustainable production systems in the world here. Our carbon footprint in this country, when it comes to cattle, 2.5 times lower than the global average. And what do? We take cellulose, which, look, Lucy, you're the nutritionist, but human beings can't survive on cellulose from what I know. And cattle take cellulose and turn it into some of the most nutrient-dense quality foods there are on the planet. This is a really exciting opportunity, an exciting future for ruminant agriculture, and dairy is front and center of that.
Absolutely. Especially, possibly, I don't know what you think, Stuart, I know it's a big conversation, we haven't got too much time, but with Brexit, again, on top of Brexit and the pandemic, there might be a refocusing of our supply chains, of sustainability. It cannot be right that we're bringing so much produce from abroad. I mean, fair enough, pineapples, guava, whatever you can't grow in the UK, but otherwise, dairy, and are we self-sufficient in the UK?
Well, look, dairy, I think, is one of the really big opportunities, because we have the water, we have the climate, we have perfect grass-growing conditions. Our maritime climate is built for growing grass, which none of us can consume. We won't live very long on producing that grass. And therefore, we have a sustainable production system. Some other parts of the world where they are taking water from areas that are suffering from severe drought, where they are taking huge volumes of protein from parts of the most biodiverse parts of the planet. This is not a production system that a UK consumer wants. The worry in all of this is, and you almost can't ignore it, is the politics around it and the trade deals around it and the standards around it. And that's why we've been so vociferous in our arguments around the importance of maintaining UK standards, because we have got world-beating producers who are producing some of the most sustainable, climate-friendly systems there are in the world. And we cannot allow people to trade those away for the sake of cheap food, which actually is not cheap food because it has a huge embedded cost, whether that be nutritional or whether that be environmental.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's great that you've picked up on the environmental impact there as well, Stuart. And I think I'm right in saying that actually dairy farming as a whole only contributes about 5%, am I right, to greenhouse gas emissions? And when you consider worldwide, I think transport is about 25% or something.
Well, there's some really interesting data that's recently been shown when we're not flying and we're not traveling so much. The cows are still burping, by the way. There's no fewer cows and they're all still burping. But look, we also need to get better. We need to become even more sustainable. I think we can't ignore the fact that we can contribute even more to a net zero ambition, to addressing the big issues of climate change, and we want to be part of that solution. And I see ruminant agriculture in a maritime climate as being a real key solution to that. But the other one, and look, I know we're short of time, we also sometimes forget how far ahead of the rest of the world we are on certain things. So if you take antibiotic use, another issue where you know, this is a big global society challenge, is antimicrobial resistance. UK farmers are head and shoulders ahead of most others in the world in terms of reducing and responsibly using antibiotics. And that's something that our dairy farmers, those old neighbours of yours, Alexia, should be rightly proud that we are world beaters in. And actually, our consumers should be proud of what we do as well.
We are.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
I think the thing that we would all agree on is that it's education, isn't it? It's education, whether you're talking to children who are still in school, whether you're talking to young people who are at university or finding their way in the world, whether you're, you know, talking to whatever, it's just educating the consumer so that every consumer knows what you, Stuart, have just said. Because if every consumer knew that, well, happy days. But the problem
is countering the myths. It's also countering.
It is, but it's also about, you know, part of this is, look, I'm a farmer, okay? I'm supposed to hide on my farm, and I don't like the public, and I don't like talking to people, okay? That's a stereotypical view. We've got to get out. We've got to use things like your networks, Alexia. We've got to use things like Open Farm Sunday. We've got to get into schools. We've got to. It is our job to do that. And we've also got to remember, and this is a blunt truth, that some of those who are countering our arguments, some of those who are peddling some of the myths, are phenomenally well resourced because of the commercials around this, the financial margins associated with some of these alternative plant-based products are eye-watering. But what do we have? We have genuine, authentic farmers on the ground who simply need to tell our story and tell it better and better and better with every day that goes by.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I just, before we can finish, we were mentioning a bit of myth busting there, if I can just add in a couple of points, which I think, again, Alexia, it's about trying to inform everybody. And there are two other points about dairy which are just absolutely fabulous. So at the moment in the UK, Public Health England are very aware that our iodine levels are getting very low. And many countries use iodized salt and we don't. And historically, dairy has been our source of iodine. So in one sort of 200 ml glass of milk, that gives us 50% of our iodine. And, you know, we need iodine for thyroid function and for growth. But actually one really interesting point, which The Lancet reported a few years ago, which came out of some fabulous research down at Bristol, was that iodine is crucial in the development of the brain of an unborn baby. And actually the research was able to link the IQ of children back to the iron levels of their mothers when they were pregnant and also before they were pregnant, iodine levels. And what it showed was that where those iodine levels were low, the resulting IQ of children sort of 10 years down the line was linked. And dairy is just a fabulous source of iodine, and it's a top tip, often something that people aren't aware of, but it's fascinating. And the other quick point is the issues around lactose intolerance, that actually if you enjoy dairy in its fermented form, so you know, nice live yogurts or fermented cheeses, the lactose is already heavily broken down in those products, so you can actually tolerate fairly small amounts of dairy perfectly fine generally, and then still benefit from all the nutrients. So you know, we could talk for a long time about it, but it's interesting.
One of the things in this, I find dairy fascinating, and we can talk about nutrition, we can talk about environmental impact, we can talk about water use or sustainability or the economics of rural communities or all that stuff. Actually, we've also got to remember, on a nice warm summer's day like today, a glass of ice cold milk, actually a really enjoyable drink. And you look at cheeses, you know, we've got different cheeses for every day of the year. And sometimes I think and those of us that are really close to the industry, and as some of us are, we can get overcomplicated about this. Actually, one of the things that we forget is one of the reasons for consuming the foods we do is because we enjoy them. And British cheeses are thoroughly enjoyable. A glass of ice cold milk is thoroughly enjoyable. And ice cream is thoroughly enjoyable. And actually, sometimes we forget about that bit. We can get too technical about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliantly put.
Ollie, what's your favourite way to enjoy dairy, would you say? You must have lots of different ways of including it.
I am a child at heart, so I do like milkshakes. I'm a big fan of cream, clotted cream and scones. Heaven right there. Like Stuart said, there are so many products you can derive from dairy, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And in a wonderful way, and they're so cherished and loved. Yeah, scones, clotted cream for me.
Excellent. Yeah, I would agree. That's a good one.
The problem is, if you go with clotted cream, you then fall into the Devon versus Cornwall debate about which goes on your scone first. So it's got to be cheese every time.
And actually, while you're mentioning just a good glass of cold milk, the other thing about that is that dentists are perfectly happy for children to drink as much milk as they want. They seriously are, because the sugar in milk, sorry, I'm going more boring back to the nutrition again, but only because the sugar in milk, the lactose, is not linked with tooth decay. So, you know, that's handy for parents to know.
One of the questions that I've got for you, Lucy, and I almost think that the whole dairy, I'm going to become heavily criticised here, but I think the whole dairy industry made a huge mistake many years ago by calling something full-fat milk.
Yes.
And actually, at 3.5%, even full-fat milk is a pretty low-fat product. But it just seemed to me as though this was a big mistake that we now can't row back from. But actually, you know, even in its like most fat form of pure milk, it's still a very healthy low-fat product.
Yeah, and you raise a great point, Stuart, and we've been trying to claw back from that for the past 30 or 40 years since that was done in the 80s, and you know, it wasn't based on particularly great research at the time. So and as you know, unfortunately, then what happens is the low-fat dairy products then have sugar added to them in the form of fruit or whatever, and so they become more calorific that way. Yeah, as you say, whole milk is only often 3 or 4% fat. I mean, you know, whole Jersey milk is about 6%, but even then, basically a low-fat food. And the great thing about having it in its whole form is that it fills you up more anyway, so you're less likely to snack, so you know, it keeps you full for longer. And really the only time that you would be advised not to go for a whole fat dairy product would be if you're diabetic. Certainly, you know, with type 2 diabetes it's not recommended, but there's very few other occasions. You know, this is the problem. Dairy has been villainized as a fatty food, and it is just not at all. And people always are surprised. Sometimes when I go into schools and I say, I hold up a pint of full fat milk, and I say, right, just out of interest, how much fat do you think is in here? And teenagers will generally guess at least 30% or above. I've had 60% with my highest. So when I say actually, you know, it's 3 or 4%, it's always enlightening. Yeah. And a really important point to put across.
And Lucy, listening to all your messages, I sort of feel that you alone could be like a one-woman advertising board.
I would happily do that. I just, you know, I mean, hey, British farming is our dairy, is our heritage, British dairy farming, and we need to do all we can to support it. And from a nutrition point of view, it's really important as well. So yeah, let's get the message out there.
Absolutely, let's cheerlead.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Is there any parting comments that anyone has to add?
Stuart, you're amazing. Thank you very much for all your hard work and for feeding me clotted cream.
Yes.
Not a problem. Not a problem. We'll make sure we get you some more.
Fantastic. And Alexia, thank you so much for all the amazing work that Love British Food is doing, trying to find a place for all this surplus milk that we have at the moment. It's a fantastic scheme, I think, the one with hospitals.
Well, we have a great team of ambassadors, Lucy, you and Ollie, and the many others behind you. Thanks very much indeed.